Do Guangting sent to a certain person. Soul quiet, thoughts in focus, looking up into the blue abyss. This very evening, the enduring sky let down an auspicious star. Last night, out on the sea, I heard the plumed wings of the peng bird. Just now, here, among men, I see the figure of a crane. So, we continue with a poet that wasn't featured in the 300 Tangs anthology at all. I don't think he is a major figure, at least in poetry, but he is included with a poem, which is the one I have just read, in Nian House's and Naparstek's Biographical Dictionary of Tang Dynasty Literati. So let's start with a little bit of a biographical background. Du Guangting was from an aristocratic background, and he settled very early in the region of Zhejiang. He lived in the late Tang, that is, from the middle of the 9th century to the first third of the 10th, which was the time which saw the dissolution and fall of the Tang dynasty. And he was quite important in this respect. He tried to pass and fail the examinations for becoming a civil servant. After that, he became a Daoist priest and joined the court of Emperor Shizong, and therefore he lived the great upheavals of the end of the dynasty, including the Huangqiao rebellion, which devastated the country and sacked and burnt the capital and forced the emperor, just like his ancestor Xuanzong, to flee into Shu. Du Guangding was honored by this emperor, but afterwards, after some other pieces of turmoil and the death of the emperor, he actually joined the entourage of Captain Wang Jiang, who became the de facto ruler of Shu, and there was where Du Guangding would stay for the remainder of his life. Now, that was a rather good place to be at the end of the Tang dynasty. Wang Jiang started a dynasty there in Shu called the Later Shu, which in many ways was probably the best sequel to the Tang dynasty itself. It was a rather short-lived dynasty, but while it lasted, it gave protection to scholars and poets, and it continued most of the culture and the institutions of the High Tang, and served as a place of refuge for many intellectuals. I think for Wei Chuang, for Du Guangting, and also for Guangxu, a Buddhist monk and intellectual who in many ways was both a partner and a parallel figure to Du Guangting. So Du Guangting, as we said, was a Daoist. He achieved many titles, and he wrote many important Daoist texts in prose, for example, records of the heavens and biographies of the immortals, and other ritualistic texts. He was also the author of a very famous Chuan Qi, a Tang short story, Qiu Ranke Chuang, the curly-bearded stranger, which is a bit of a historical piece, depicting the rise of the Tang dynasty in its early days. And I think most of his reputation lies in those Taoist texts of his and on this short story. But he also wrote poetry, and that's what brings us here today. Mostly poetry with a Taoist content, with the typical subjects that we would see in this sort of poetry: holy grottos, sacred mountains, holy men, perennial cranes, spectral apes, the divine spectacle of radiant clouds and blazing stars. Also, there's this, Chuzhu-like element of roaming the heavens, of harnessing the moon toad, riding on divine birds. And the poem we've read today is quite a good representative of this sort of poetry. Its title is Zheng Reng, sent to a certain person. It's a heptasyllabic quatrain, and the topic about it is, straightforwardly Taoistic. We have the poetic persona engaging in meditation, looking at the cosmos. Probably this meditation is the culmination of a series of Taoistic religious and ascetic practices, and he gets this sort of an inner vision in which signs first external, then internal, come around, which indicate that he is going to achieve transcendence and immortality. So, pretty straightforward Daoist theme. But the way in which he develops it is aesthetically satisfactory. I think it's quite well developed. Well, without further ado, let's take a look at the two couplets of the poem. First couplet. Soul quiet, thoughts in focus, looking up into the blue abyss. This very evening, the enduring sky let down an auspicious star. So the couplet, the first line especially, immediately locates us. The poet is meditating. His soul is quiet. His thoughts are focused. This is meditation. Some meditative practice is taking place, and probably is the culmination of years, perhaps, of training. But the essential thing, we get introduced into the poem through this state of peacefulness, of mindfulness, that the poetic persona has achieved. And that's the internal state, but it has outward manifestations or activities. Apart from reaching this calm, what is the poet doing? Well, he is looking up into the blue abyss. Abyss or abyss? I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Anyway, that blue abyss would be the heavens. So probably this is a poem composed, set at night time, when the poet is meditating, concentrating, and looking at the heavens. What does he see? Well, the heavens show him a sign. Well, the heavens are not just an astronomical place, they are the place where the greatest of Taoist paradises is located, even though there are many in grottos. But, the stereotypical view of what a Taoist wishes to do is, purify himself and become an immortal and float away to heaven and to the heavenly courts and kingdoms, including the court of the Jade Emperor. So while meditating and looking at this blue abyss, which connotes these Taoist heavens, but also immensity, liberation, expansion, wide, unfathomable space. And this touches on a very Taoistic idea, nature as not unhuman, but ahuman, that is not measurable or understandable within the constraints of human reason and logic. So while doing this, while meditating and gazing at the heavens, this very evening, the enduring sky let down an auspicious star. So an auspicious star is seen, maybe a shooting star, and this is interpreted by the poetic persona as an auspicious sign, probably as a heavenly indication that his efforts to achieve immortality and to follow the Tao, the Taoist way, are going to be rewarded with success. Second couplet, so the first couplet puts us in a meditative scene, but it's an outward, external world. The second couplet focuses once again on the inner, like the first images of meditation. It focuses on inner thought and inner visions. We've had an external vision, this shooting star. Now we have a couple of internal visions. So second couplet goes like this. Last night, out on the sea, I heard the plumed wings of the peng bird. Just now, here among men, I see the figure of a crane. I don't know where this poem was composed, but I would suspect that it probably was composed in Shu, and perhaps the poet was quite far away from the sea. So this last night out on the sea is probably not meant to be interpreted literally. It's a sea of the soul. A sea and the sky both represent this exploration of vast, unfathomable spaces that are reached through Taoist meditation. So last night, meditating out in the sea, in this metaphorical sea, the poetic persona heard the plumed wings of the peng bird. Now, the peng bird is a gigantic bird that appears in Taoist lore and mythology. I think it appears in one of the first texts of the Chuang Tzu. And, this massive bird floating around, I think is yet another symbol, in this case, a personal, lived one, through the mind's eye, if you wish, instead of like the shooting star. Hearing the wings of this great bird seems to act as a summons. The poetic persona is a small bird himself is summoned to join the flight towards the heavens and the abandonment of the mundane and dusty material world. There's also a contrast in this couplet between last night and just now, which is the second line. So last night I had this personal vision, oral vision, not visual like the shooting star of this evening, but oral, hearing this great beating of the wings. And just now, a visual one, here among men, surrounded by the people, I see the figure of a crane. Cranes were usually associated with Taoism. They were like the vehicles that were taken by the perfected to go into heaven. A lot of immortals in a lot of Taoist legends fly away to heaven by riding a crane. So these divine birds, the pengbird, the crane, are clearly acting out or representing potential vehicles for a longed-for journey to paradise. And the appearance of the crane in this final line is a very clear symbol of an imminent departure to immortality, confirming the poetic augury that the poetic persona is not long for the world of men. He will soon fly away. And that was it. I think it's a quite likable poem. The translation, I'm not sure who did it. Let me see. Probably Edward Schaffer or Cordell Gee or William Nienhauser, who appear as the writers of this entry in the book. Probably Edward Schaffer, who generally enjoyed this sort of Daoistic poetry and has a couple of books at least on it. So, very curious Taoistic entry. And as I said, this reminds me, and he will act as a parallel to a Buddhist poet monk that we will talk about in a few months' time, Guangxiu.